The American Congressional Exchange is a program that we have that BPC started where we bring two members together, a Republican and a Democrat from two very different parts of the country, and we have them visit each individual's districts and really get to know not only that member, but also that district.
Now, up until that trip, I did not know David Trone. And because of his willingness to make the trip, to come out, to spend that time with me, I can testify that I now have a friend and an ally on many issues of mutual concern.
Many of us share the same principles, and we bring to the table different life experiences, different political perspectives. We shouldn't find that dangerous or divisive. We should find it something to celebrate.
This is how America works, is by coming together, rolling up our sleeves, getting away from the partisanship, getting away from the rhetoric, and getting back to just delivering.
When you have a conversation with people and you laugh and you get to know them, you no longer see them in the same light, and you're much more willing to say, let's figure out how we can be friends and really find solutions. It creates a different type of dialogue and friendship that exists, and it also allows those members to see how different parts of the country are and how many similarities there are.
Welcome to the Bipartisan Policy Center's release of the report entitled Making Food Nutrition Security a SNAP, its recommendations for the 2023 Farm Bill. The full report and summary can be downloaded from our BPC website. I'm Bill Hoagland, Senior Vice President here with the Center, and have had the honor of working with the task force, its co-chairs, and the BPC staff on this final report, along with their two previous ones. The task force has been led by four co-chairs, former Secretaries of Agriculture, Dan Glickman from the Clinton administration, and Secretary Ann Veneman from George W. Bush administration, very bipartisan. They were joined by Leslie Saracen, President and CEO of the Food Industry Association, and Chef Jose Andres, founder of the World Central Kitchen. You'll shortly hear from all four co-chairs, all very committed to ensuring food and nutrition security for everyone. In the interest of time, I'm not going to be able to name all other 13 outstanding members of the task force. They are listed prominently on the first page of the report, except to say they represent a broad spectrum of stakeholders, including both food advocacy organizations, medical profession, business, the military, and academics. My sincere thanks to all of them for their dedication and contribution to the work of the task force over the last 2 years. I also want to thank the World Central Kitchen and the Rockefeller Foundation for their support of this project. Now, the Farm Bill is considered every 5 years and is up for reauthorization this year in 2023. Every title of the Farm Bill affects millions of agriculture producers, suppliers, manufacturers, food retailers, rural communities, but realistic, every person who consumes food, and that, of course, is all of us. Historically, the Farm Bill has been a bipartisan bill, and indeed, I believe Chairwoman of the Senate Agriculture Committee, Senator Stabenow, recently stated her intention to pass the Farm Bill in 2023 with bipartisan support. Further, the new chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, Congressman G.T. Thompson, has stated he hopes it will be a bipartisan package. And so there's no surprise then that the task force and we here at the Bipartisan Policy Center are encouraged by these statements, but we also realize with a divided Congress that there are challenges will lie ahead. The challenge may be made more difficult when we note that on the spending side of the equation, nearly 80% of the Farm Bill's expenditures are devoted to the nutrition title. So we are pleased to begin our discussion today with staff from the nutrition subcommittees of both the Senate and House Agriculture Committee, and importantly, from both majority and minority. To lead this discussion, we are fortunate to have Helena Botmiller-Eflich, editor-in-chief of Food Fix, an online publication about food policy in Washington and beyond, and former senior reporter at Political, where she covered the intersection of food policy and politics. Before I turn this over to Helena, as a former congressional staffer myself, I want to be clear to our audience that we have not asked the congressional staff to take a position on any of the recommendations in our report, of course, unless they want to. But policies may be influenced by staff, but their bosses, the ones with the election certificates hanging on the wall, are the ones who make the final decisions. So with that, Helena, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Bill. I'm really delighted to be here to talk about such an important topic. Thanks to the Bipartisan Policy Center for having me. As Bill mentioned, I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Food Fix, which is a weekly newsletter about food policy, tracking all of this. We have a really fantastic lineup today of staff that represent the four corners of the Farm Bill. So what that means in Washington is the four key posts that make decisions, the majority and the minority of both the House and Senate Agriculture Committees. So when you hear that term four corners, that's what we mean. We have Claire Borsner, who works for the majority in the Senate, so for Chair Debbie Stabenow. We have Catherine Thomas, who works for the minority in the Senate, so Ranking Member John Boozman. We have Jennifer Tiller, who works for the majority in the House, so Chair G.T. Thompson. We have Catherine Stewart, who works for the minority in the House, so for Ranking Member David Scott. I want to emphasize that we are really early in the Farm Bill process. So the committees are still forming. We do not even have full lineups for both of the committees. It's very early. However, I think there's a lot of momentum and sort of excitement to get the Farm Bill process started. So with that caveat of it's still really early and it's hard to predict where things are headed, we are going to try to keep this conversation forward looking and pretty high level. We know we have a lot of people tuning in today who might be interested in the Farm Bill, but might not know a lot about that big piece of legislation, might not know how the process usually works. And so we're going to talk about what to expect. As Bill mentioned, staff here are not authorized to comment on the specifics of this report. So we're not going to go into the specific recommendations at all, but we're really going to talk about the process and sort of what to expect and what it takes to get a Farm Bill done. So I think we'll start with kind of a basic one, right? Which is that when you hear the word Farm Bill, you don't necessarily think about nutrition. And yet it is, more than 80% of the spending of this bill. I thought maybe we'd start with you, Claire, from the Senate side. What are some of the programs you're looking at on the nutrition side? And can you kind of help orient the audience to why we would talk about nutrition in the context of this bill?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about nutrition in Congress, nutrition is broken up between kind of child nutrition programs, school meals, summer meals, the WIC program, meals and childcare, which are handled through a child nutrition reauthorization, versus kind of all of the Farm Bill nutrition programs, which includes SNAP and the programs within SNAP. So SNAP Ed, SNAP Employment and Training, as well as programs related to supporting food banks, supporting nutrition incentives, things like GusNIP, Healthy Food Financing Initiative, supporting farmers markets, a really kind of broad range of nutrition assistance, as well as, procuring food, ensuring that, folks have the food that they need. Also programs like FDIPR, the Food Distribution Program on Indian reservations, and the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, really kind of programs aimed at, reaching different populations and reaching people, where they are. Obviously, this is a really big component of the Farm Bill, and we do think that there's kind of a direct impact on farming as well, because, when folks are able to buy food, that also benefits ag. And so I think there's kind of a lot of connections across the board for these programs.
I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in here in terms of just kind of the gap between maybe the public's understanding of what's in the Farm Bill and what's actually in the Farm Bill. A lot of it's nutrition. What other pieces of nutrition do you find come up in your conversations with constituents or different interest groups that maybe someone just coming to the Farm Bill might not be aware of? I don't know if maybe Catherine Thomas, you want to jump in? We'll stick to the Senate side.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I might comment on something that's not included in the Farm Bill. So we have the Food and Drug Administration, and that's actually overseen in the Senate and in the House by different committees. So since they do all the regulation of what food is safe and when there's recalls, kind of standards for dietary intake, so added sugar is something that has been in the conversation. We're not really talking as much about food regulation. It's more about making sure that folks have enough to eat.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I want to talk about process at a high level. So I mentioned that we're really early in this process. You know, it's 2023. We just kicked off into a new Congress. The goal is to try to get a farm bill done this year. There's a lot of things that need to happen. There's been some press coverage suggesting that maybe the House Agriculture Committee will go first in this process, which is something that has happened in the past. So I was hoping maybe Jennifer Tiller, will start with you. Lay out where we're going next. Sort of what do you see happening in the next 6 months from the perspective of the House side, and what can folks expect as this process gets started?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for hosting me to the Bipartisan Policy Center, and look forward to further conversation with my colleagues. So I think Chairman Thompson has been very clear that he wants to hit the ground running this Congress. Many of you know that's been reported. He's visited well over 30 states over the past 2 years. And so that will continue, as well as a rigorous DC-centric hearing schedule, other field listening sessions, and then aggressive oversight. I think that there are perhaps areas that have not been focused on over the past few years that do deserve our attention, including how the 2018 Farm Bill impacted not only producers, but consumers, and particularly recipients of any of the benefits that Title IV has to offer. And, you know, Mr. Thompson is a healthcare guy. He talks about this all the time. He really believes in assessment. And so assessment is necessary to producing a product that has the impact on producers and consumers that helps change sort of their lot in life and their outcomes. And so I'll pause there, but I can promise that there will be multiple hearings, multiple listening sessions, and different types of oversight initiatives.
Yeah, that's certainly a lot of work to kick off here in a short amount of time. I don't know if maybe the Senate side wants to jump in, or maybe Catherine Stewart, if you want to hop in to just talk about what to expect over the next 6 months to a year, just in terms of process. Like, for example, I think we have a date for a nutrition hearing on the Senate side in mid-February. Like, what's coming next? I don't know who wants to jump in. How about Claire? Because you have a hearing coming up.
Sure. Yeah. So I can say, in terms of kind of process, so within the Senate, we are doing kind of our title by title hearing process right now. We had done a couple hearings in the last Congress, and we're continuing those now. We've announced a few of our upcoming hearings, including a nutrition hearing. We also expect that our subcommittees will be doing Farm Bill related hearings as well, to bring stakeholders to the table. And so once we kind of go through our hearing process, then we go through the process of actually writing and then ultimately negotiating, both with our counterparts in the Senate and then with our counterparts in the House. And so right now I would say that we're very much in kind of our information gathering phase. Within for the Senate, we have a portal that's open so that folks can submit comments. We also do a number of stakeholder meetings. And so right now it's a lot of kind of getting feedback from folks on what is working, what's not working, what we need to change, to kind of keep that in mind as we move forward.
I can just add from the House side that in addition, of course, to all the work that I know will get underway soon under our chairman. You know, last Congress, we also held 19 Farm Bill related hearings and held a number of listening sessions across the country. So we've similarly been kind of in an information gathering phase, and I think that will help to inform as we move forward with additional hearings this year and negotiations as well.
Yeah, I want to talk about the dynamics in the House and Senate Ag committees in particular. It's sort of known to still be one of the more bipartisan committees. And I think, you know, as Bill mentioned at the beginning, leaders on both sides have really emphasized the need for this to be a bipartisan process. I was hoping each of you could sort of comment on that and how you see that dynamic being important to getting this to the finish line.
I'm happy to jump in. I think the chairman believes there's more opportunities for bipartisanship than not. He's been very clear about that. Yes, nutrition occupies, it will be roughly 84 to 86% of the total Farm Bill spending. However, there are so many opportunities across the 12 titles to collaborate with the other three corners. And so I don't think there's any hesitation there. And then big picture, I think the politics of the House are indicative of the necessity for bipartisanship across many arenas. And so we look forward to having those conversations with our counterparts and figuring out where we can align, but also where some necessary conversations have to take place. I don't think drawing lines in the sand on any particular title is helpful at this point. I do think, and this goes wider than the Congress, is that, you know, help us craft policy, don't dictate the process. The process is something that unfolds itself amongst the four corners. And amongst over the time that it takes to put together this bill. And so we want to engage with one another just as much as we want to engage with you. But again, bipartisanship is always the goal. So we look forward to continuing that engagement and continuing that history that Helena mentioned.
Yeah, and just to hop in with two bits of context for our folks who might not be as familiar, when we're talking about titles, we mean like sections of the Farm Bill. So there's so many different topics involved. I think at one point, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack called the Farm Bill a Swiss Army knife, which I think sort of indicated how many pieces and how many tools are sort of involved. So when we're talking about titles, that means sections. And then I think what Jennifer's alluding to here in the House is just the really tight margin of House Republican control. And when you have a tight margin, you really can't lose any members or you can't get a farm bill through. So if you have people who are protesting any piece of the bill, then it has to by default be bipartisan. So just to give context, maybe for those who are outside of Washington or who might not be familiar with the process. But I'd love to hear more thoughts on sort of the bipartisan dynamic in these committees and maybe how it's different than the other committees on the Hill. I don't know who wants to weigh in. Maybe Catherine Thomas, you want to jump in? We have two Catherines, so we have to.
Yeah, we're lucky. I saw it was declining on the list of baby names, but Catherine and I are keeping it up. Anyway, so for agriculture, one of my former bosses said that it's more of a regional issue, and I think everyone agrees with that. There's different types of agriculture across the entire country. Nutrition is largely handled in a similar way, but it's those ag divisions that sometimes can determine why someone votes for a farm bill or not. As Jennifer mentioned, it's a tight margin, and in the Senate to pass a bill, you need 60 votes. There's not 60 votes on either side of the aisle. There hasn't been for a very long time, and so we've always relied on passing it with bipartisan support. But agriculture is something that not as many people pay attention to. Nutrition, I think you hear about in every district because there's hunger in every district. But that's why there can be a short attention span from members on the committee. And so people who are on the committee kind of stick together, people who are off the Hill stick together to make sure that there's continuing support in this area. And even from a smaller committee, smaller voice, we're still heard.
I don't know if anyone has anything to add, but it definitely is I think the bipartisan theme is certainly stronger on the food and agriculture side just because of the nature of this bill and sort of how it has to come together. It's certainly a different issue to cover. I think some of my friends in politics are covering different kinds of knife fights in different committees. So I know it's still really early in the process, but I was hoping to get a sense from each of you of what kinds of things you're hearing groups raise in terms of nutrition and sort of healthy eating and anything in that lane in regard to the Farm Bill. So, we know that the vast majority of the resources in the Farm Bill go to programs like SNAP, which a lot of people still know as food stamps. But in terms of, incentives or food as medicine, or sort of these levers that are being discussed in terms of using, or I guess inserting nutrition more into the Farm Bill and healthy eating into the Farm Bill, what are you hearing from groups at this early stage? What kinds of topics are coming up? I don't know, maybe we'll start with you, Claire. What are you hearing? Again, I know it's early. We're not saying that you're going in one direction or another, but I'm curious what kinds of meetings you're having at this point or hearing from folks.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of meetings, but it's great to kind of hear so many perspectives. I think what is really interesting about the nutrition title, and especially when we talk about SNAP, is that there's such a broad coalition of folks who have interests. There's obviously sort of the traditional nutrition community, then there's also, retailers and grocers and food banks, faith-based communities, the medical community, agriculture, who kind of all see the benefits of these programs. And so it's very interesting to talk about the same program from many different angles. I think there's also a lot of focus and effort on kind of what has changed since the last Farm Bill. So some things like we've seen SNAP Online drastically expand since the last Farm Bill, and kind of what is needed, what are the investments that we need to make to modernize the program, to improve technology. We've seen issues like SNAP skimming drastically increase recently. So how do we ensure that families are not victims of having their benefits stolen? These kind of questions that we may not have been having several years ago. So I think that's kind of a big component, how we can just make these programs easier to access, work better for the folks who are applying, but also for the states who are administering the programs. So kind of a lot of questions on kind of those aspects. I think for my boss, like incentives are certainly something she's really interested in. We've seen it operate really successful in Michigan, which started Double Up Food Bucks, went nationwide with the GusNIP program. I think, we're seeing more of a conversation around access to food, but also access to healthy and affordable food, and how programs like incentives and nutrition education can really kind of play a role here.
Yeah, and just for folks who may not be aware, Double Up Food Bucks or sort of incentive programs can give SNAP participants extra funds to buy things like fresh fruits and vegetables, or there's different incentives that have been tried, but it is one of the sort of, I guess, maybe in the last 10 years has been sort of there's been a more of a movement towards testing incentives and allowing that to be part of the program, although it's not part of the program writ large. Anyone else want to weigh in on like what they are hearing in terms of topics that are being raised at this nexus of nutrition, healthy eating, and the Farm Bill? Again, I know it's early. We're not committing you to anything, but what are you hearing? Jennifer, I see you're unmuting. Go for it.
Yeah, I think everything that Claire said obviously spans across to the other side of the Capitol, to the House. I do think there's not as much emphasis on technology as I personally would like to see, and how we can advance electronic benefit systems, how we can address skimming issues, how we could address data capture issues. Some of the things that we touched on in the 2018 Farm Bill, which are slow to move forward, I think we'd like to hear more on. But also, I think a lot of what I would consider more typical asks are coming across, whether it be cold storage for our food bank systems, conversations about whether produce prescriptions still fit into the incentive structure. Folks are reaching out about restrictions, of course, an ongoing debate related to SNAP Choice. And for those who are new to the conversation, that's whether or not folks are going to restrict what SNAP consumers can purchase. And for what it's worth, Mr. Thompson has been very public that he will not restrict And then I think just generally like nutrition education, how is it actually working for families? Consumer education is one of those things that has not worked, whether you're receiving SNAP benefits or not. So making sure that we continue to hear from, as we have thus far, from land grant universities, nonprofit partners, private sector partners, on bettering that. So it's just more impactful. And again, I think that brings us back full circle to the chairman's focus on assessing what has been working, what hasn't been working, and where we as the Congress can do better.
Yeah, nutrition is one of those hard things where, in Washington, I think we've seen over the years several things be tried, whether or not they're at the scale to do anything. You mentioned consumer education, but the truth is, like, diet-related diseases have worsened. We now have a majority of Americans who either are overweight or have obesity. I mean, we sort of see the stats, and it is one of those interesting questions of like, which of our policies are working or not working. I think it's particularly hard on the nutrition front to look at that because there's so many pieces involved. Catherine Thomas, do you want to weigh in just on what kinds of meetings you're having? What are you hearing from groups at this stage?
Sure. I mean, it's largely a lot of the similar issues that others have heard about. I think on our side of the aisle, a lot of folks are looking at returning to normal practices following flexibilities that happened during the pandemic. Claire mentioned the online pilot, and I think that was the silver lining of the pandemic to test and roll out online purchasing for SNAP. It was something that was a pilot during the 2014 Farm Bill, which means they tested on a smaller scale in a few states. And in 2018, when we were writing the Farm Bill, those pilots still had not begun. And so this was an exciting opportunity to roll that out. There were things, as Jennifer mentioned, that were not actually completed, items we wanted to test from the last Farm Bill, just because USDA was tied up with a lot of other pandemic items. So I think on our side, we want to do some oversight. So get information from USDA on how some of those programs worked, whether there were integrity issues, meaning there was fraud or other issues, and have that look back as we're trying to write policy moving forward.
Yeah, the online, the move to allow SNAP online nationwide is a really interesting, I think, underappreciated thing that happened during the pandemic. So for folks who aren't aware, you can now, I think in all 50 states, and in thousands of retailers, you can use SNAP benefits to purchase groceries online, really allowing, lower income families to have some of the same delivery or pickup options as other families. And it's been really popular. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head what the numbers are, but I think it's rapidly been adopted by SNAP households, and it'll be interesting to hear more about that. On the technology side, though, a couple of you mentioned skimming. I think it might be good to explain a little bit more about what that is. Folks maybe have seen a little bit of news coverage of this, but this is essentially when a scammer, a criminal, steals EBT benefits off of a card. And a lot of times I think they're actually I think that's why it's called skimming. Someone should correct me, but they're taking the information when they're using their cards, they're stealing it, and then they're draining the accounts. And I don't know if, Jennifer, you want to talk a little bit more about what we know about this and sort of how you see it coming up. I know we don't quite have a full picture of how much this is happening, but we're seeing more press coverage of it. And so I know it is something that's going to come up a lot during this Farm Bill cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I can turn it over to the Senate in a moment because a lot of the text originated through our colleagues at Mr. Scott in Ms. Stabnow's office. But quickly, if y'all remember a couple of years ago when those devices were put on gas pumps and you would put your credit card into the gas pump, and in essence, a criminal was stealing your information and then using your credit card information elsewhere. So that's the same thing that we're seeing or hearing that's happening with SNAP consumers. I do think a finer point, I mentioned this earlier and Helena just did as well, the data is lacking. And if you go back to the omnibus bill that was passed in December, there is a request for more information plus coordination. This is not siloed to SNAP. This is impacting folks who, for example, are receiving temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, which is a cash welfare benefit. And so we want to make sure that there's strong coordination amongst entities responsible for issuing benefits using the electronic benefits transfer system to make sure that we do understand what's actually happening at the state level, where it's happening, which I do think is an important part of the conversation, and how we can rectify moving forward. But that data piece is significantly lacking, and we do hope we get more information on the depth and breadth of the issue in future. But turn it over to my Senate or House colleagues to talk more about that.
I'm happy to talk a little bit about it. Mr. Scott, is a champion of including the language that ended up in the fiscal year 23 omnibus addressing the issue, which had bipartisan support from all of our bosses. I think one of the heartbreaking problems is that, under existing law, there's not authority for the federal government to reimburse recipients of stolen benefits. So in addition to, just broadly the terrible issue of benefits being stolen and crimes happening, there's that additional piece on top of it where recipients have been the ones who are out the funding. So we are really glad to get agreement on a short-term or maybe midterm 2 years worth of reimbursement from federal government for any stolen benefits, as well as a dual track EBT security piece to help address ensuring that EBT cards are more secure and honestly keep up a little bit better with commercial credit cards, which are generally more secure, unfortunately, than EBT cards. And I think, to Jennifer's point, it's something we definitely are looking at and trying to learn more about. And, as we know more, potentially addressed in the upcoming Farm Bill, if there's additional action that's needed on our end.
Yeah, and just to put a finer point on that for anyone who isn't familiar with how this works, if your credit card is stolen and someone buys something, you're probably going to be made whole. But that same type of system doesn't exist for EBT. So even families who very much could prove or knew that their benefits were stolen haven't had any recourse to get those benefits back. And in some cases, we're talking about, hundreds of dollars for very low income families that they were relying on. So the omnibus language, I think it's interesting to view it as sort of a midterm solution in terms of until we figure out how to deal with this issue more broadly, there needs to be a way to help these families out when they're struggling to provide food for their families. I think that's sort of the gist there. Claire, do you want to jump in at all just in terms of how the Senate side's thinking about addressing this? I know you were also very involved with that omnibus language.
Yeah, absolutely. And to build off of what Jennifer and Catherine were saying, we were hearing stories that families had a month's worth of groceries and didn't realize that their benefits had been stolen until they were in the checkout line to buy all of those groceries. And, so for these families, SNAP is so vitally important. And so it's really, really heartbreaking to kind of hear these cases. I think what is hard, and as my colleagues have already mentioned, we are thinking about the need to kind of stay one step ahead, because we can maybe modernize EBT technology, but we know that bad actors are going to be continuing to try to find kind of workarounds. And so kind of as we think about technology, to Catherine's point about kind of better keeping up with credit card technology, the need to be kind of further anticipating other kind of security threats or kind of breaches, which can oftentimes be tricky for Congress to really be super flexible and kind of forward looking. So, that's definitely something going to be an area that we're considering as well.
Yeah, it's a hard one too, because it's a little bit different than, you hear concerns about fraud. And that would be someone, a participant doing something illegal, but this is really criminals targeting SNAP participants, which is just a problem that we're seeing cropping up in a lot of places. We only have a couple of more minutes here, and I was hoping that each of you could just say briefly what advice you have for anyone tuning in who wants to be involved in this process or who wants to follow along with the Farm Bill and nutrition. What are the ways that people can get involved or follow along here? What is helpful for you as staff as well in terms of hearing ideas and those types of things? I don't know if maybe Jennifer, do you want to start? And we'll just really quick. We have a couple more minutes. Yeah.
Yes, I will be very succinct. First, like others, our website has a portal to submit information on what's working and what's not working per title. So feel free to log in and log your comments. Also, there's opportunities for staff level meetings. So please do take us up on those. I think just one little bit of advice when you're requesting meetings, be very strategic in your meetings. Don't duplicate efforts. For example, don't ask perhaps the chairman for a meeting as well as staff, same folks, same topic. Think about who's best suited to take your meeting and discuss your priorities. Participate in the listening sessions. And then going back to what I said earlier, please continue to participate generally in the policy discussions. And there are so many different ways to do that, whether it be DC hearings, the portal, conversations with staff, formal meetings with staff, etc. So look forward to hearing from y'all.
Catherine Stewart, do you want to hop in, round out the House side? Any advice you have for folks who want to be involved?
Sure. Not a ton to add. Jennifer really covered it. I think the only thing I would say in addition to that is potentially if you haven't met with your member of Congress, it's always great to reach out to them directly. They're always interested in what their constituents want. And as they prepare for the Farm Bill, they'll want to know, what's the priority for folks they represent. So highly recommend that too. If your boss is on the Agriculture Committee, even better. But all the members will be voting for on the floor. So it's important to talk to them about these issues and why they're important. And if you have any specific things you'd like to see in the bill, let them know.
Yeah, that's great advice. Claire or Catherine, do you want to jump in on the Senate side in terms of getting involved?
Yeah, I think that really, covers the crux of it. We also have a portal on the Senate Agriculture Committee website. Love to hear from folks on what kind of comments. We're also always accepting, letters from organizations. That's really helpful for us to kind of put into the record as we're doing hearings and, things like that. So if you represent an organization, or are a part of a coalition, that kind of outreach is really helpful as we kind of gather formal recommendations. And absolutely, yeah, reach out to your member of Congress, Senate and House, even members who are not on the Agriculture Committee often want to get engaged and share their priorities and what's important to, their state with us. And so ensuring that kind of you are reaching out to your members is really helpful as well.
Great. And so folks can find those portals by literally just Googling House Agriculture Committee or Senate Agriculture Committee. You should be taken right to those websites. All right. We are 1 minute over schedule, so I'm going to turn it back to Bill. Thank you all so much for tuning in.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Helena. Thank you, the two Catherines and Claire and Jennifer. Very helpful. Early stages, setting the stage for what could be a very lengthy but important discussion about food, nutrition, agriculture going forward. At this time, we're going to turn to two of our co-chairs for their comments, Secretary Glickman and Leslie Saracen, who I had mentioned earlier is the president of the Food Manufacturing Institute. And we'll listen to their comments, and then we'll turn to Chef Andres. So with that, we'll turn it now to our friends at Secretary Glickman.
Good afternoon. And I thank everyone for joining today's event for the release of the third and final brief from the Bipartisan Policy Center's Food and Nutrition Security Task Force. And today marks the culmination of our work of our 16-member task force, but it doesn't end the work that the BPC is going to be doing on nutrition research and nutrition implementation of federal programs. I've been pleased to co-chair this diverse bipartisan task force with Secretary Ann Veneman, with Chefs Jose Andres, and with Leslie Saracen. And I think you're going to hear from all of them later in the webinar. So since our launch in May of 2021, this task force has issued 3 detailed policy briefs to advise the Congress, the administration, and those outside of government and even in the private sector to address food and nutrition security. And the earlier reports dealt with public health emergencies, COVID, dealt with trying to ensure that we have a White House conference on food, nutrition, and health, which we did. And the second report dealt mostly with issues involving strengthening child nutrition programs like the school meal programs, summer feeding, and WIC. And today we are making our final set of recommendations on federal programs. But as I said, we're going to be dealing with other issues involving nutrition in the future. But the programs today have to do with reauthorization largely of the SNAP program. And we strongly believe that the second letter of SNAP, nutrition, is the N in SNAP, is one of the focuses of our report today. So we talk in this report and our recommendations about the need to ensure that the benefits provided are adequate, and in some cases they are not. We talk about the need to increase nutrition security through expanded investment programs like the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program, or GUSNIP. We talk about SNAP pilot programs that encourage or incentivize eating fruits and vegetables or other healthy foods. And we also talk about increasing our data collection on the program itself, who takes advantage of it, what kind of foods that they eat. So we further improve our collection efforts on SNAP and implementing, evaluating the impact of the National Accuracy Clearinghouse, but also evaluating the impact on food consumption and health, which is the most important thing to do. We have a lot of other recommendations in this report, and I think it will prove hopefully very valuable for Congress as they begin deliberations on the next Farm Bill, which I believe will take place, those deliberations this year and possibly next year as well. You know, we believe that the SNAP program has been extraordinarily important in making this country probably the leading country in the world in providing food security assistance for the poor, the needy, the hungry, and particularly families with small children. And so many of these recommendations will hopefully strengthen the program, so it will continue to operate as effectively as possible. We have a divided government in America, and our role in the BPC is to try to improve the delivery of bipartisan solutions to our nation's problems. A bipartisan path forward is the only way that a Farm Bill will get done this year. And I think our recommendations will help facilitate that. So with that, I thank you very much for listening to me, and also hope that you enjoy the words of my fellow co-chairs as well.
Hello, I'm Leslie Saracen, President and CEO of FMI, the Food Industry Association. On behalf of FMI and the entire food industry, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude for the time and effort of my fellow co-chairs, as well as the members of this task force, in working together to develop the set of recommendations being released by BPC today. We all know how important it is to ensure the SNAP program continues to serve our fellow Americans in a meaningful way. The members of this task force come from diverse organizations and backgrounds, but we're all united in the strong belief that we must address the hardship of hunger in this country. By coming together as one, our efforts to develop these recommendations demonstrate to policymakers, as well as to the public, that we're serious about preserving and strengthening our safety nets so that all Americans can live without the fear of going hungry. As we all know, addressing food and nutrition insecurity is a pressing national concern, not only from a public health standpoint, but also for improving individuals' mental and emotional well-being. When families don't know where their next meal is coming from, it's not just their physical health that suffers. Countless scientific studies have proven that more frequent family meals are associated with better nutrition and improved family dynamics. Unfortunately, families can't reap these benefits if they don't have access to nutritious, affordable foods. As the organization that represents the food manufacturer and retailer community, FMI is proud to play an important role in addressing these problems. Our grocery store associates are the faces that families receiving SNAP benefits see every day when they purchase their groceries. We have a great responsibility to make sure the program is efficiently designed and effectively implemented so that we can best meet these customers' needs. And we take that responsibility very seriously. The food industry has made great progress in implementing online SNAP programs throughout the country over the course of the pandemic. We're now able to offer customers flexibility through in-store purchases, curbside pickup, and at-home delivery so they can obtain the food they need for their families in whichever way is most convenient for them. We're also providing customers with more, healthier options throughout the stores, including no-calorie and low-calorie options in the beverage aisle, so they can better manage their own health and that of their families. But even though we've made great strides on these fronts, we still have more work to do. Last October, FMI hosted an event in Washington to bring together industry, nonprofits, academia, and government to collectively build on the momentum of the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health held a month earlier. The goal was to foster conversations around and find solutions for addressing food and nutrition insecurity. As an example, the food industry has committed to donate 2 billion meals to charitable organizations in 2023. And we also committed to reach at least 100 million consumers with evidence-based messages and educational tools that support healthy eating patterns. To paraphrase my colleague and friend, former USDA Secretary Dan Glickman's comment from the stage at our event, food policy, and hunger-related issues are of central importance in the present and the future for all of us. We appreciate our continued partnership with BPC as we work to identify solutions that provide all Americans with the foods they need to thrive. As BPC's Bill Hoagland is fond of saying, food is not a partisan issue. That's why we're pleased to have a seat at the table in developing the recommendations in the report released today. We look forward to working with our fellow industry stakeholders, the advocacy community, and government partners to strengthen the SNAP program. By working together, collectively, we can have a significant and positive impact in making sure all Americans have access to food that is safe, nutritious, and affordable. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate that very much, and thank you for your efforts and Secretary Glickman's. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to another co-chair, Chef Jose Andres. Thank you, Chef, for taking the time to and your travels to join us on this as we release this report today. And thank you and your organization for the support of this work here. So, Chef, over to you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Leslie, and Secretary Glickman and Secretary Vineman. It's been amazing spending all this month working with you and learning from all of you. So, I will say that we are going to be listening from more people, great people, experts that are also passionate on this amazing responsibility we all have in our shoulders about making sure that food is not a problem, but food is a solution to the many issues we may face in America. So, for many years, we've talked about food as the problem that really needs solving, but seems every 5 years we come together with the Farm Bill or the Child Nutrition Reauthorization in an attempt to solve it. Sometimes barely scratching the surface. Or as happened this last year, every 50 years we host a big White House conference and make commitments to how we can be ending hunger and improving nutrition. Then, once in a century, we were all together on this, we have a pandemic. that forces all of us to adapt and respond quicker and with more urgency than sometimes any piece of legislation. We learn how to think outside the box. And that's what we need. Big, ambitious ideas with pragmatic ways to get where we all want to be. And that's why I'm so proud to be part and the work this BPC task force has done to create these recommendations for the 2023 Farm Bill. When we see that hunger and nutrition security are still problems in America today. So I'm very proud that we can be recommending increases in the SNAP benefits, as well as flexibility that will allow families to spend their benefits in more locations and on healthier foods. That's the American way. You know, with progress in this direction, we can dream of a SNAP not only becoming a short-term solution to hunger, but a long-term strategy to empower and enrich communities as we make a healthier America. And I'm also proud to be recommending that Congress move Puerto Rico and other US territories from NAP to SNAP. So those Americans living in other parts of the hemisphere are able to feed themselves with the same dignity as their fellow citizens living in the 50 US states. Whatever in times of crisis or normal times, because food has the potential to bring dignity and hope, to be part of the solution, not the problem. We can make practical recommendations today and work in a bipartisan way to pass a strong farm bill that improves nutrition security all across. So, while at the same time we're looking at the future where food is not an afterthought, not an issue to address, as I said before, every 5 years. People, I know you know it, but I'm gonna repeat it. Food is at the core of how we make a smart policy that becomes a smart politics. So today's announcement from the FDA is all the proof we need, putting food at the center. We know, I know, we all share that same belief that is the best way to create a healthy, equitable, and a prosperous future for our country. Thank you very much, and really thank you for letting me be part of this amazing group that I'm not only happy on to see what you guys we're gonna be able to recommend in the 2023, but this I think is something like it's gonna be having an impact in many years ahead. So in 10, 20 years, we look back at this moment. And I think all of you should feel so very proud of yourselves. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chef, and thank you for your contributions. And we're very proud and happy to have you a contributor to this particular report and the strong recommendations as it relates to our territories in Puerto Rico. At this time, our final and commenter, and not the least, most important, former Secretary of Agriculture Ann Veneman, co-chair also. So Secretary Veneman, your final comments for today.
Thank you very much, Bill. And many thanks to my fellow co-chairs who you've all just heard from, and also to the Hill staff for their really excellent panel today. And thanks to all of you who have joined us today and for taking an interest in this subject. As we've talked about today, several years ago, the name of the food stamp program was changed to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. But the program itself has not really been altered to focus on nutrition. The average American has poor diet quality, with only about 60% of diets aligning with the evidence-based dietary guidelines for Americans. Poor diets are increasing the risk for a host of health problems in both children and adults. Things like obesity, type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, heart disease, some cancers, and more. If diet quality across the population improved, even modestly, the US could save billions of dollars a year in healthcare costs. That's why this report, along with others that we have supported with the BPC over the years, not only focuses on food security, but on nutrition security. BPC's policy recommendations are designed to improve nutrition in SNAP and other programs in the Farm Bill, including nutrition pilots. In promoting the end of nutrition in SNAP beyond what is already being discussed by other co-chairs, we recommend improving education with efforts, nutrition education and integrating them better with federal nutrition programs. Enhance data collection to measure diet quality status and progress for all Americans and for federal nutrition program participants. We've heard a lot about data today. We think that's a very important part of really learning how to improve people's diets. Perhaps most importantly, we've recommended developing additional demonstration projects or pilot projects that evaluate innovative approaches to reduce hunger and improve nutrition. These pilot projects or demonstrations should consider the added challenges that SNAP participants and families face in achieving a nutrient-rich diet as compared to the overall population. We encourage USDA to use their existing authority to improve nutrition in SNAP and for the population as a whole. The recommendations in our brief are common sense and bipartisan and should be useful in informing this year's Farm Bill reauthorization, as our other reports have been in past Congresses. We hope that these recommendations will jumpstart a discussion about the need to further emphasize and improve nutrition in our federal food programs. It's been a pleasure working with the BPC's Bipartisan Food and Nutrition Security Task Force as we work to improve diets for Americans. As we work to improve the diets for Americans, their health and quality of life should improve as well. Thank you again to all of you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Veneman. Let me close by once again thanking Helena and the congressional staff and our wonderful co-chairs for sharing their thoughts with us today. I highly recommend those of you who are interested in following up to call up and go to our website and review the executive summary. It's a long report, but the executive summary will crystallize the major recommendations that we have, and some have been discussed here today. Of course, I also want to thank all members of the task force and their staffs for their dedication in bringing this final product to conclusion. But most importantly, a huge thank you and appreciation to the BPC staff and its consultants. Dr. Anand Parakh, our Chief Medical Officer, Shannon Christop, our Public Health Director, who joined us late but helped bring the final product to completion, Hannah Vora, our Policy Analyst, our two very dedicated consultants, Melissa Martin-Shepard and Stephanie Hodges, our BPC Action Team, Andrew Hugh and Michael Lovegrove, and Jean Ruff, our communications, and finally, a very big shout out to Emma Sheffert, the project coordinator who kept us on schedule and was so instrumental in bringing this project to conclusion. You know, food and nutrition security and the health of the public are so inextricably linked. It is such that is so that the BPC health team will continue, as has been suggested, to focus our resources on them. Indeed, it's been mentioned, we will be launching a new work stream in a month ahead, focusing on food as medicine. Finally, as I think Secretary Glickman mentioned, this was not an easy report. Not everyone on the task force was pleased with the final product, but compromise, as we know, is the essence of bipartisanship in the political world we live in today. As was mentioned, I believe food should not be a partisan issue, and we hope the task force's recommendations will be considered and acted upon in a bipartisan 2023 Farm Bill. Thank you again for joining us today. Have a good day.